When my daughter told me it was time to move to a nursing home at my own 75th birthday party, I smiled, excused myself, and made one phone call. By morning, she discovered that some decisions have consequences she never saw coming. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The living room buzzed with conversation as friends and neighbors gathered around the dining table I'd bought 40 years ago. 75 candles flickered on the chocolate cake my neighbor Mrs. Patterson had kindly made, casting warm light across faces I'd known for decades. This was supposed to be a celebration, but something felt different about the way my daughter Jennifer kept checking her watch and whispering to her husband Mark. "Make a wish, Dad," called out my grandson Tommy, bouncing on his toes with the excitement only a 10-year-old could muster. I closed my eyes and wished for what I always wished for: more time with family, good health, and peace in my golden years. The room erupted in applause as I blew out the candles, but Jennifer's smile seemed forced, like she was acting in a play she didn't want to be in. "Speech! Speech!" someone called from the back, and I stood up slowly, my arthritis reminding me of my age but my mind still sharp as ever. I looked around at the faces of people who'd been part of my life for so long. Neighbors who'd borrowed sugar and returned casseroles during tough times, old friends from the hardware store where I'd worked for 35 years, and family members who'd gathered to celebrate another year of life. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. When I was young, I never imagined I'd be lucky enough to see 75 years, let alone have so many wonderful people to share it with. This house has seen so much joy, so many birthdays, graduations, and holidays. It's been a blessing to call it home. The crowd smiled and nodded, but I noticed Jennifer and Mark exchanging another look. Something was coming, and the knot in my stomach told me I wasn't going to like it. As guests began to leave, hugging me goodbye and promising to stop by soon, Jennifer started clearing dishes with unusual efficiency. "Dad, we need to talk," she said without looking up from the cake plates she was stacking. "Mark and I have been discussing your situation, and we think it's time to consider some changes." The word situation hit me like cold water. My situation? I lived independently in the house I'd owned for 42 years, drove myself to the grocery store and doctor's appointments, maintained my own yard, and cooked my own meals. What situation was she talking about? "Changes?" I asked, settling back into my favorite recliner, the one I'd bought when Jennifer graduated high school. "What kind of changes?" Mark cleared his throat and joined us in the living room, his expression serious. "Robert, we've been worried about you living alone in this big house. What if you fall? What if there's an emergency? Jennifer loses sleep thinking about all the things that could go wrong." I studied my son-in-law's face, looking for genuine concern but finding something else instead. Mark worked in real estate, and I'd seen that same expression when he talked about property values and market opportunities. This wasn't about my safety. This was about something else entirely. "I appreciate the concern," I said carefully, "but I'm doing just fine. I've had the same doctor for 20 years, and he says I'm in excellent health for my age. I work in the garden every day. I walk 2 miles every morning, and I've never felt better." Jennifer sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap like she was preparing for a business meeting. "Dad, you're 75 years old. That's getting up there. We've found a wonderful assisted living facility just 20 minutes from our house. Sunny Meadows has great reviews, and they have activities and nurses on staff 24 hours a day." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock I'd inherited from my father. Sunny Meadows. They'd already been looking. This wasn't a conversation. This was a presentation of a decision they'd already made. "I don't need assisted living," I said firmly. "I need my independence, my home, my garden, and my routine. I've worked my entire life to have this house, and I'm not ready to give it up." Mark leaned forward, his voice taking on that patient tone people use when they think you're not understanding something obvious. "Robert, think about it practically. This house is worth quite a bit of money. You could sell it, use some of the proceeds for the assisted living facility, and still have a substantial amount left over for your care and, well, for Jennifer's future. There it was. The real reason for this conversation. Not my safety, not my health, not my happiness. Money. My house, my life's investment, converted into cash they could manage and eventually inherit. My future is here, I said quietly. In this house, in this neighborhood, with these neighbors who've been my friends for decades. I'm not moving to a nursing home because you think it's time. Jennifer's patient facade began to crack. Dad, you're being stubborn. We're trying to help you plan for your future before something happens. What if you have a stroke? What if you break a hip? What if? What if I live to be 90 and enjoy every minute of it in my own home? I interrupted. What if I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my own life? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark stood up and began pacing, a habit I'd noticed whenever he wasn't getting his way. Look, Robert, we're not asking you to decide tonight. But we really think you should visit Sunny Meadows, just to see what it's like. Keep an open mind. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised from a baby, whom I'd supported through college, whose wedding I'd paid for, whose house down payment had come from my savings account. When had she stopped seeing me as her father and started seeing me as a problem to be solved? I'll think about it, I said, knowing I wouldn't but needing them to leave so I could process what had just happened. My own birthday party had been turned into an intervention I never asked for. After they left, I sat in my recliner looking around at the house that held every memory of my adult life. The kitchen where my late wife Margaret had taught Jennifer to bake cookies. The living room where we'd opened Christmas presents for 35 years. The bedroom where Margaret had taken her last breath 5 years ago, holding my hand and making me promise to stay strong. This wasn't just a house. It was my life, my history, my sanctuary. And apparently, it was also worth enough money to make my own daughter forget that I was still capable of living in it. The next morning, I made my usual cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten breakfast for over 4 decades. Sunlight streamed through the windows Margaret had insisted on when we renovated the kitchen in 1998, and I could see Mrs. Patterson working in her garden next door. Everything looked the same, but something fundamental had changed last night. I pulled out the manila folder I kept in the kitchen drawer, the one with all the important family financial records. If Jennifer and Mark wanted to talk about money and my future, maybe it was time to review exactly how much of my future I'd already invested in theirs. The first document was Jennifer's college tuition receipts. State University, 4 years, room and board included. I'd worked overtime shifts at the hardware store every weekend for her entire high school career to save up the $47,000 it cost. Margaret had taken a part-time job at the library to help cover the expenses. We'd been so proud when Jennifer graduated with her teaching degree, even though she'd only taught for 2 years before deciding it wasn't for her. The wedding expenses came next. $23,000 for what Jennifer called the perfect day. The dress alone cost $1,800. Margaret had wanted something simpler, but Jennifer insisted that Mark's family expected a certain level of elegance. We'd dipped into our retirement savings because we couldn't bear to see our daughter disappointed on her wedding day. Then came the house documents. When Jennifer and Mark decided they needed to buy their first home, they'd come to us with earnest faces and spreadsheets showing how they almost qualified for the mortgage they wanted. Almost. They needed $15,000 for the down payment to avoid private mortgage insurance. Just a loan, Dad, Jennifer had said. We'll pay you back as soon as Mark gets his real estate license. That was 8 years ago. Mark got his license, started selling houses, and they'd never mentioned paying us back. When I'd brought it up once, Jennifer had looked hurt and said, Dad, we're family. I thought you gave us that money because you wanted to help us get started in life. I kept flipping through the folder. Car repairs when their transmission died, $3,200. Emergency root canal for Mark when he didn't have dental insurance, $1,900. The loan for Mark's real estate certification courses, $2,400. Christmas gifts for Tommy every year because kids need magic at Christmas, probably $500 each year for 10 years. By my conservative estimate, I'd given Jennifer and Mark over $100,000 during their marriage, not including smaller amounts for birthdays, emergencies, and the countless times I'd babysat Tommy for free while they went on vacation or had date nights. The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted me to sell my house and move to assisted living so there would be money left for Jennifer's future. But Jennifer's present had been funded by my past sacrifices for 20 years. I remembered Margaret's words during one of our late-night conversations about money. Robert, we raised her to be independent, but we keep making it possible for her to depend on us. When does it end? Margaret had been gone for 5 years now, and I missed her wisdom every day. She would have known how to handle last night's conversation. She would have seen through Mark's real estate calculations and Jennifer's false concern. She would have protected our home and our independence without making anyone feel guilty about it. The phone rang, interrupting my trip down financial memory lane. Jennifer's name appeared on the caller ID. "Hi, honey," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Dad, I hope you're not upset about last night. Mark and I were talking, and we realized we might have come on a little strong. We just love you so much and want what's best for you." The practiced tone told me this was a planned call, probably with Mark coaching her on what to say. "I'm not upset," I said truthfully. "I'm just thinking about everything you said." "Good. I'm so glad you're keeping an open mind. I called Sunny Meadows this morning, and they have a tour available this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Would you like me to pick you up?" 2 o'clock. She'd already scheduled the tour without asking if I was interested. "Jennifer, I told you I'd think about it. I didn't say I was ready to tour nursing homes." "It's not a nursing home, Dad. It's assisted living. There's a big difference. These places are like resort communities now. They have golf courses and swimming pools and social activities. You might actually enjoy it more than being alone in that big house all the time." Alone in that big house. As if being alone was automatically a problem that needed solving. As if the house I'd worked my entire life to own was somehow too big for one person to enjoy. "I'm not alone," I said. "I have neighbors, friends, my garden, my routine. I have a life here." "I know, Dad, but think about the future. What happens when you can't drive anymore? What happens when the house becomes too much to maintain? What happens when—" "Jennifer," I interrupted, "what happens when you stop treating me like I'm already incapable of making my own decisions?" Silence on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was sharper, less patient. "Dad, I'm trying to help you plan ahead instead of waiting for a crisis. Why are you being so difficult about this?" Difficult. I was being difficult by wanting to stay in my own home and live my own life. I'm not being difficult. I'm being independent. There's a difference. "Fine," she said, and I could hear Mark saying something in the background. "Fine. But I already told them we'd be there at 2, so I'm going to tour the facility anyway. You can stay home if you want, but I'm going to gather information for when you're ready to be realistic about your situation." My situation. That word again. As if being 75 and healthy was automatically a situation that needed managing by someone else. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen looking at the receipts and records of 20 years of financial support. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory, "When does it end?" Maybe it ended when your own daughter decided you were too old to make your own decisions. Maybe it ended when love became conditional on compliance. Maybe it ended when family stopped being about support and started being about control. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet where I kept my important documents. My will was in there, along with the deed to the house, my insurance policies, and my financial statements. Everything was organized and up to date because I'd always been responsible about my affairs. Margaret and I had planned for our future together, and after she passed, I'd continued to plan for my future alone. The house was worth $340,000 according to the latest property tax assessment. No mortgage, no liens, no debt of any kind. My retirement savings and Social Security provided me with a comfortable income that covered all my expenses with money left over each month. My health insurance was excellent, and I had long-term care insurance in case I ever needed it. By any objective measure, I was in better financial shape than most people my age. I wasn't a burden on anyone, I wasn't struggling to maintain my independence, and I wasn't in any kind of crisis that required intervention. So why did Jennifer and Mark want me out of my house and into assisted living? The answer was in those receipts on my kitchen table. They'd been depending on my financial support for years, and they wanted to ensure that dependence could continue in the future. A house worth $340,000 represented security for them, not for me. The realization hurt more than I expected. This wasn't about my welfare, it was about their inheritance. They weren't worried about my future, they were worried about theirs. I thought about all the times I'd sacrificed my own wants and needs to help them achieve their dreams. The overtime shifts, the retirement fund withdrawals, the vacations Margaret and I didn't take because we were helping Jennifer and Mark buy their house or pay for Tommy's activities. We'd raised Jennifer to be independent, but we'd never stopped enabling her dependence. We'd taught her to work hard for what she wanted, but we'd also taught her that Dad's money was always available when working hard wasn't enough. Margaret had been right to question when it would end. The answer was becoming clear. It would end when I decided it was time for it to end. The confrontation came 3 days later, but this time Jennifer brought reinforcements. I was watering my tomato plants when Mark's SUV pulled into my driveway, followed immediately by a sedan I didn't recognize. Jennifer got out of Mark's car, along with Tommy, but 2 strangers emerged from the sedan. A middle-aged woman in a business suit and an older man carrying a briefcase. "Dad, we need to talk," Jennifer called as she walked across my front yard. "This is Patricia Williams from Sunny Meadows, and this is David Chen, an elder care consultant. They've agreed to meet with us to discuss your options." My options. Apparently, my option to say no wasn't being considered. I turned off the garden hose and faced the delegation that had arrived uninvited to discuss my future without my consent. "I didn't agree to any meeting," I said calmly. "And I certainly didn't invite strangers to my home to discuss my personal affairs." Patricia Williams stepped forward with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Johnson, I completely understand your hesitation. Many seniors feel overwhelmed when they first consider transitioning to a care community. That's perfectly normal." Seniors, care community, transitioning. The language was designed to make my independence sound like a phase I was supposed to outgrow. "I'm not overwhelmed," I replied. "I'm annoyed that my daughter scheduled a meeting I didn't request about a decision I haven't made." David Chen opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Mr. Johnson, I've reviewed your situation based on the information your daughter provided. You're in what we call a vulnerable transition period. Living alone at 75, maintaining a large property, managing finances without oversight. These are all risk factors that concerned family members should address proactively." Risk factors. Vulnerable transition period. Without oversight. Every phrase was designed to make my normal, healthy, independent life sound like a crisis waiting to happen. "The only risk I see," I said, looking directly at Jennifer, "is the risk of letting other people make decisions about my life when I'm perfectly capable of making them myself." Tommy tugged on Jennifer's sleeve. "Mom, why are these people here? Is Grandpa sick?" Jennifer knelt down to Tommy's level, but her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Grandpa isn't sick, honey, but he's getting older, and we want to make sure he's safe and taken care of. Sometimes older people need help making good decisions about their future." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I wasn't just old, I was incompetent. My decisions weren't just different from theirs. They were bad decisions that required correction by younger, wiser people. "Tommy," I said, walking over to my grandson, "do you think Grandpa seems like he needs help making decisions?" Tommy looked up at me with clear, honest eyes. "No, Grandpa. You help me make decisions all the time. You're really smart." Jennifer's face flushed red. "Dad, don't put Tommy in the middle of this." "I'm not putting him in the middle of anything. I'm asking for his honest opinion, which seems to be the only unbiased perspective I'm going to get today." Mark stepped forward, his real estate training kicking in as he tried to regain control of the situation. "Robert, let's just listen to what Patricia and David have to say. Knowledge is power, right? The more information you have, the better decision you can make." Patricia Williams launched into what was clearly a rehearsed presentation. Sunny Meadows offers 3 levels of care, starting with independent living that's basically like a luxury apartment with services. You'd have your own space, your own kitchen if you want to cook, but also access to communal dining, housekeeping, maintenance, and social activities. She handed me a glossy brochure filled with photos of smiling elderly people playing cards, exercising in a fitness center, and eating in an elegant dining room. Everyone looked happy and healthy and nothing like the nursing home residence I'd imagined. The financial structure is quite reasonable, David Chen added, consulting his paperwork. Based on your home's estimated value and your income, you could easily afford the monthly fees while maintaining a substantial financial cushion for future needs. There it was again, my home's estimated value. Not my desire to stay in it, not my attachment to it, not my right to live in it. Just its financial value and how that value could be converted into monthly payments to someone else. What if I don't want to live in a luxury apartment with services? I asked. What if I want to live in my own house with my own garden and my own memories? Patricia's smile faltered slightly. Mr. Johnson, I understand the emotional attachment to a family home. But we have to be practical about the challenges of aging in place. What happens when you can't maintain the yard anymore? What happens when climbing stairs becomes difficult? What happens if you have a medical emergency and no one finds you for days? Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Dad, we worry about you all the time. What if you fall in the shower? What if you have chest pains in the middle of the night? What if there's a fire or a break-in? I looked around at the 4 adults who had gathered in my front yard to discuss all the ways I might die or become incapacitated in my own home. Jennifer, I could have a heart attack at the grocery store, slip on ice in a parking lot, or get hit by a car while crossing the street. Are you going to lock me in a padded room to prevent every possible accident? That's not the same thing, and you know it, she snapped, her patience finally wearing thin. We're talking about reasonable precautions for someone your age. Someone my age. As if 75 was automatically 95. As if being eligible for senior discounts meant being incapable of independent thought. David Chen tried a different approach. Mr. Johnson, let me show you some statistics about seniors who age in place versus those who transition to care communities. The quality of life measurements are quite compelling. He pulled out charts and graphs that supposedly proved people in assisted living were happier, healthier, and more socially engaged than people living independently. The data looked impressive until I realized it was probably collected by the assisted living industry to justify their existence. David, I said, do you live in assisted living? He looked confused. No, of course not. I'm only 58. And when you turn 75, will you sell your house and move to a care community? Well, that depends on my circumstances at the time. Exactly. It depends on your circumstances, your health, your preferences, and your choice. Just like it should for me. Patricia Williams looked at her watch and then at Jennifer with an expression that suggested this wasn't going according to plan. Mr. Johnson, perhaps you'd be more comfortable discussing this privately with your family. We can schedule another time to continue our conversation. There won't be another time, I said firmly. I appreciate your time, but I'm not interested in moving to assisted living now or in the foreseeable future. I'm healthy, I'm independent, and I'm happy in my own home. After the strangers left, Jennifer, Mark, and Tommy remained in my front yard. Jennifer was furious, Mark looked frustrated, and Tommy seemed confused by the tension he couldn't quite understand. Dad, you're being incredibly selfish, Jennifer said, her voice shaking with anger. We're trying to help you plan for your future, and you're acting like we're the enemy. You brought strangers to my house to convince me to give up my independence. How am I supposed to feel about that? You're supposed to feel grateful that people love you enough to care about your welfare. Jennifer, if you cared about my welfare, you would have asked me what I wanted instead of deciding what you thought was best for me. Mark pulled out his phone and started tapping the screen. Robert, I've been running some numbers. This house is worth at least $340,000, maybe more in the current market. Your property taxes alone are $4,200 a year. Add in maintenance, utilities, insurance, and upkeep, and you're probably spending $15,000 a year just to live here. He turned the phone screen toward me, showing a calculator app with numbers I hadn't asked to see. At Sunny Meadows, you'd pay $3,200 a month, which includes everything: housing, meals, housekeeping, maintenance, social activities, and basic healthcare monitoring. That's $38,400 a year, but you'd eliminate all the risks and responsibilities of home ownership. The math was designed to make my house look like a financial burden instead of a financial asset. But Mark's calculations conveniently ignored the fact that I owned my house outright while assisted living was essentially expensive rent with no equity building. "Mark," I said, "my house costs me $15,000 a year to maintain, but it's worth $340,000. At Sunny Meadows, I'd pay $38,400 a year for rent with no ownership, no equity, and no control over future price increases. How is that a better deal?" "Because you'd have security and peace of mind," Jennifer interjected. "And so would we." There it was. The real reason. Not my security, theirs. They didn't want the responsibility of worrying about me, even though I hadn't asked them to worry and didn't need them to worry. "Jennifer, your peace of mind is not my responsibility. I'm not going to rearrange my entire life to make you feel better about decisions that don't affect you." Tommy had been quiet during this entire exchange, but suddenly he spoke up. "Mom, why do you want Grandpa to move? I like his house. It has the best yard for catching lightning bugs." Jennifer's expression softened when she looked at her son, but her voice remained firm. "Tommy, Grandpa's house is very big for just one person. He might be happier somewhere with other people his age. But Grandpa has Mrs. Patterson next door, and Mr. Williams across the street, and all the neighbors who wave at him when we visit. He has lots of people." From the mouths of babes. My 10-year-old grandson understood something the adults seemed to have forgotten. I had a community here, relationships built over decades, a support system that money couldn't buy. "Tommy's right," I said. "I have neighbors who check on me, friends who invite me to dinner, a doctor who's known me for 20 years, and a grandson who likes to catch lightning bugs in my yard. Why would I give that up to live with strangers?" Jennifer's patience finally snapped completely. "Because you're 75 years old. Because things change when you get older whether you want them to or not. Because we love you too much to let you be stubborn about something this important." The word stubborn hung between us like a slap. Wanting to maintain my independence wasn't principled. It was stubborn. Choosing to live in my own home wasn't reasonable. It was obstinate. Having different priorities than my daughter wasn't valid. It was difficult behavior that needed correction. "Jennifer, I've listened to everything you've said. I've met with your experts, looked at your brochures, and considered your concerns. Now I need you to listen to me. I am not moving to assisted living. I am not selling my house. I am not changing my life to accommodate your anxiety about my future. This discussion is over." Mark stepped closer, his voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "Robert, you need to be realistic about this. Jennifer and I have power of attorney if something happens to you. We're going to be responsible for your care and your finances whether you like it or not. Wouldn't it be better to make these decisions together while you still can?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable. They had legal documents that would give them control over my life if I became incapacitated. They were reminding me that my independence was only guaranteed as long as I remained healthy and competent. But they'd made a critical error. I'd been managing my own affairs for 75 years, including through Margaret's illness and death. I wasn't some confused elderly person who'd signed documents without understanding them. "Mark, you might want to check those power of attorney documents again. I had them updated after Margaret died, and I was very specific about the conditions under which they take effect." The color drained from Mark's face. He'd been bluffing, assuming I'd signed standard forms that would give them broad authority. But I'd worked with an attorney to ensure my documents protected my autonomy unless I was truly incapacitated, not just older. Jennifer looked confused. "What does that mean?" It means that your power of attorney only takes effect if I'm declared mentally incompetent by 2 independent physicians. Being 75 doesn't qualify. Being stubborn doesn't qualify. Disagreeing with your life choices for me doesn't qualify. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer and Mark exchanged glances that confirmed they'd been counting on legal authority they didn't actually possess. "Dad," Jennifer said quietly, "we're just trying to help." "No, sweetheart. You're trying to control. There's a difference." The intervention attempt was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Jennifer launched a campaign designed to prove I was incapable of living independently. She started calling every other day with concerns about my welfare that hadn't existed before our confrontation. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson mentioned you seemed tired when she saw you checking your mail yesterday. Are you feeling all right?" "Dad, Mark drove by your house on Tuesday and noticed you hadn't brought in your garbage cans yet. That's not like you." "Dad, Tommy said you seemed confused about what day it was when he called last weekend. Maybe you should see your doctor." Each call was a fishing expedition, looking for evidence of decline that could justify their desire to control my living situation. Jennifer was building a case against my competency, documenting every minor inconsistency as potential proof that I needed supervision. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when I answered my doorbell to find Jennifer standing on my porch with a man I didn't recognize. "Dad, this is Dr. Morrison from the Senior Wellness Center. I've asked him to do a quick assessment of your cognitive function, just to establish a baseline for future reference." Dr. Morrison stepped forward with a practiced smile and an official-looking clipboard. "Mr. Johnson, this will only take a few minutes. I'm going to ask you some simple questions about your daily routine, your memory, and your decision-making process." The ambush was so blatant it took my breath away. Jennifer had brought a stranger to my home to evaluate my mental competency without my consent, under the guise of a baseline assessment that would undoubtedly be used to justify their intervention plans. "Dr. Morrison," I said calmly, "I haven't requested an assessment, I don't need an assessment, and I don't consent to an assessment. I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property." "Dad, don't be paranoid," Jennifer said. "Dr. Morrison is just trying to help establish that you're capable of living independently. Isn't that what you want?" The manipulation was breathtaking. They'd brought someone to evaluate my competency, then framed my refusal to cooperate as evidence of the paranoia they were supposedly trying to rule out. "Jennifer, if you want to establish that I'm capable of living independently, stop trying to prove that I'm not." Dr. Morrison consulted his clipboard. "Mr. Johnson, I understand your reluctance, but your daughter has expressed some valid concerns about your welfare. A simple cognitive assessment would put everyone's mind at ease." "Doctor, my daughter's concerns are not valid. They're manufactured to justify a decision she's already made about my future. I don't need to prove my competency to anyone, especially not to strangers who show up uninvited at my home." Jennifer's face flushed red with frustration. "Dad, you're acting exactly like someone who needs supervision. You're being paranoid and defensive and refusing reasonable help. I'm being protective of my rights and my privacy. There's a difference." Dr. Morrison tried a different approach. "Mr. Johnson, perhaps we could just have a casual conversation about your daily routine. No formal assessment, just a chat between 2 people." The persistence was telling. If this was really about establishing my competency, my refusal to participate should have ended the conversation. The fact that they kept pushing suggested they needed specific documentation for some purpose I wasn't being told about. "Doctor, I'm curious about something. Who's paying for your time today?" He looked uncomfortable. "Well, your daughter contacted our center about arranging for an assessment." "That's not what I asked. Who's paying your fee for being here?" Jennifer jumped in before he could answer. "I am, Dad. I'm paying for this because I care about you and want to make sure you're okay." "Jennifer, if you were really concerned about my welfare, you would have suggested I see my own doctor, who's known me for 20 years and understands my baseline cognitive function. Instead, you brought a stranger to my house to conduct an evaluation I didn't request. Why?" The question hung in the air while Jennifer struggled for an answer that wouldn't reveal her true motives. Dr. Morrison shuffled his papers and looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Dad, Dr. Morrison specializes in senior cognitive assessment. He's more qualified than your regular doctor to evaluate whether you're showing signs of age-related decline. Signs of decline that would justify what, exactly? Silence. Neither Jennifer nor Dr. Morrison wanted to answer that question directly. Dad, we just want what's best for you. What you want is documentation that would support a guardianship petition or an involuntary commitment to assisted living. That's why you brought a specialist instead of suggesting I see my own doctor. That's why you're documenting every minor inconsistency in my behavior. That's why you've been building a case against my competency for 2 weeks. Dr. Morrison looked genuinely shocked. Mr. Johnson, I assure you that wasn't my understanding of the situation. I was told you were having memory issues and confusion. Doctor, does someone who's having memory issues and confusion typically analyze your motives this clearly? He had the grace to look embarrassed. No, sir, they typically don't. Jennifer's composure finally cracked completely. Fine. Yes, we're documenting things because we're worried about your judgment. You're refusing reasonable help, you're isolating yourself in this big house, and you're being impossible about planning for your future. Someone has to look out for your welfare since you won't. The truth was finally out. They weren't documenting my decline. They were manufacturing evidence of decline to justify taking control of my life and my assets. Jennifer, my judgment is fine. My isolation is actually independence. And my future planning is excellent. It just doesn't match your plans for my future. Dr. Morrison quietly gathered his papers. I think there's been a misunderstanding about why I'm here. Mr. Johnson, you clearly don't need cognitive assessment. You're articulate, reasoning clearly, and demonstrating excellent judgment in protecting your autonomy. After he left, Jennifer and I stood in my living room facing each other across a divide that felt wider than the room itself. Dad, I can't watch you make mistakes that will hurt you. Sweetheart, I can't let you make decisions that will hurt me in the name of protecting me. She sat down heavily in Margaret's old chair, looking defeated and confused. Dad, I don't understand why you're fighting us so hard on this. We're trying to help. Jennifer, let me ask you something. When you were 25 and Mark proposed, what would you have said if I told you he wasn't the right man for you and tried to hire a relationship counselor to prove it? That's completely different. Is it? You would have said I was interfering in your life, that you were capable of making your own decisions, and that my opinion about your future wasn't more important than your own. You would have been right. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. You're really not going to move to Sunny Meadows, are you? No, sweetheart. I'm not. And I'm not going to submit to cognitive assessments or evaluations or any other attempts to prove I'm incompetent when I'm not. Then what happens now? I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and loved and supported for 38 years, and realized she'd never learned to accept that love didn't come with control attached. Now you decide whether you want a relationship with your father that's based on respect for my autonomy, or whether you want to keep fighting a battle you can't win. She stood up slowly, gathering her purse and keys. Dad, I need some time to think about all this. Take all the time you need, Jennifer. I'll be here, in my own house, living my own life. After she left, I sat in my recliner feeling strangely calm. The war was over, even if Jennifer didn't realize it yet. She'd shown her hand, revealed her true motives, and failed to achieve her objectives. More importantly, I'd discovered something about myself I hadn't known before. I was much stronger than I'd thought. For 20 years, I'd been Margaret's husband, Jennifer's father, and Tommy's grandfather. Those roles had defined me and given my life meaning. But somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that I was also Robert Johnson. A man with his own dreams, preferences, and rights. It was time to remember who that man was and what he wanted from the years he had left. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my address book. Margaret had always kept our important contacts organized in a small leather book, and after she passed, I'd maintained the tradition. I flipped through the pages until I found the number I was looking for. Harrison, Mitchell and Associates, estate planning attorneys. Richard Harrison had helped Margaret and me update our wills after her cancer diagnosis. He was thorough, discreet, and understood the complexities of family relationships when significant assets were involved. More importantly, he'd helped me structure my legal documents to protect my autonomy while ensuring my true wishes would be honored. "Mr. Johnson," Richard said when his secretary put me through, "it's good to hear from you. How can I help?" "Richard, I need to make some changes to my estate planning documents." "Significant changes?" "Of course. Would you like to schedule an appointment to discuss the specifics?" "Actually, I'd like to discuss them now, if you have a few minutes. The situation is somewhat urgent." I spent the next 30 minutes explaining the events of the past 3 weeks. Richard listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions about Jennifer and Mark's behavior and their apparent plans for my future. "Robert," he said when I finished, "what you're describing sounds like a preliminary campaign for guardianship or conservatorship. They're documenting behavior they could later characterize as incompetent decision-making." "That's what I suspected. The question is, what can I do to protect myself?" "Several things. First, we can update your power of attorney documents to make it even more difficult for anyone to claim authority over your affairs. Second, we can create an irrevocable trust that protects your assets while ensuring your wishes are followed. Third, we can document your current cognitive state with a comprehensive evaluation by an independent physician." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was going to seek the very kind of evaluation I'd refused from Jennifer, but on my own terms and for my own protection. "Richard, I want to do all of those things. But I also want to make sure Jennifer understands that her behavior has consequences." "What kind of consequences?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would fundamentally change my relationship with my daughter. "I want to remove her as my primary beneficiary and power of attorney. I want to establish conditions that any inheritance is contingent on respectful treatment during my lifetime." "Robert, that's a significant step. Are you certain you want to make those changes?" "I've been supporting Jennifer financially for 20 years while she's taken my generosity for granted. Now she's trying to control my life and steal my independence. Yes, I'm certain." We scheduled an appointment for the following Monday to begin the legal process. But Richard had one more suggestion that intrigued me. "Robert, you might also consider making your intentions known to Jennifer before we finalize the changes. Sometimes the prospect of consequences is more effective than the consequences themselves." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about Richard's suggestion. Jennifer believed she held all the cards in our relationship. She was younger, she had Mark's support, she had legal documents she thought gave her authority over my future. She was operating under the assumption that I was a helpless old man who would eventually surrender to her superior judgment. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The next morning, I called Jennifer and asked her to come over for lunch. She arrived looking cautiously optimistic, probably hoping I'd reconsidered her assisted living proposals. "Dad, I'm glad you called. Mark and I have been talking, and we think maybe we pushed too hard last week. We're willing to slow down the process and give you more time to get used to the idea." I served her a sandwich and iced tea at the kitchen table where I'd fed her lunch thousands of times during her childhood. "Jennifer, I need to share some information with you. I've been talking to my attorney about updating my estate planning documents." She smiled, clearly misunderstanding my intentions. "That's great, Dad. It's always smart to keep those things current. I'm removing you as my primary beneficiary." The sandwich froze halfway to her mouth. "What?" "I'm removing you as my primary beneficiary and as my power of attorney. I'm establishing a trust that will donate the majority of my assets to charity upon my death." She set down her sandwich with hands that had started to shake. "Dad, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. 20 years of financial support. And this is how you repay me? By trying to steal my independence and control my life? By bringing strangers to my house to evaluate my competency? By treating me like I'm already senile? Dad, We were trying to help you. Jennifer, you were trying to help yourselves. You've been counting on inheriting this house and my savings to secure your own financial future. That's why you want me in assisted living. So the assets are preserved for your benefit instead of spent on my care. Tears started running down her cheeks. That's not true. We love you. You love my money. There's a difference. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared with copies of all the financial support I'd provided over the years. College tuition, wedding expenses, house down payment, car repairs, emergency loans, $127,000 over 20 years. And what did I get in return? A daughter who thinks I'm too stupid to make my own decisions about my own life. She stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Dad, we never asked you to keep track of all that. No, you just asked me to keep paying. And I did, because I loved you and wanted to help you build a good life. But I never signed up to buy your respect along with your college education. Dad, please don't do this. I'm sorry about the nursing home thing. I'm sorry about Dr. Morrison. We'll stop pushing about assisted living. Jennifer, it's not about assisted living anymore. It's about the fact that you fundamentally don't respect me as an adult capable of making my own decisions. You think being my daughter gives you the right to override my choices when they don't match your preferences. She was crying harder now, makeup running down her cheeks. Dad, I was scared. I was scared something would happen to you and I wouldn't be there to help. Sweetheart, being scared doesn't give you the right to control my life. Your fear about my future doesn't override my right to live that future on my own terms. What can I do? How can I fix this? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something I'd missed before. Under the manipulation and control and financial opportunism, there was genuine fear. Not fear about my welfare, but fear about losing the safety net I'd provided for her entire adult life. Jennifer, you can start by accepting that I'm not your retirement plan. You can stop treating my assets like your inheritance. You can learn to have a relationship with me that's not based on what I can do for you financially. Dad, it was never just about money. Wasn't it? When's the last time you visited me just to spend time together? When's the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When's the last time you showed interest in my life that wasn't related to your concerns about my competency? She couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. Since Margaret died, every interaction we'd had was either Jennifer asking for something or Jennifer worrying about something that affected her. I want to fix this, she said quietly. Tell me how to fix this. Start by apologizing to your son for trying to manipulate him into supporting your campaign against me. He loves his grandfather and shouldn't be caught in the middle of your attempts to control my life. I never meant to involve Tommy. But you did. You used him as a witness to my supposed confusion. You discussed my competency in front of him. You made him worry about my health when there's nothing wrong with me. The guilt on her face told me she hadn't considered how her behavior had affected her son. I'll talk to him. Good. Second, you need to have an honest conversation with Mark about your financial plans. If you're counting on inheriting my house to fund your retirement, you need to make other arrangements. Dad, we're not counting on anything. Jennifer, Mark calculated my housing costs down to the dollar and compared them to assisted living fees. He knows exactly what this house is worth and exactly how that money could benefit your family. Don't pretend this isn't about finances. She was quiet for a long moment, probably realizing that their motivations had been more transparent than they'd thought. Third, you need to decide whether you want a relationship with me based on love and respect, or whether you want to keep fighting for control you'll never have. I want a relationship with you, Dad. I love you. Then prove it. Respect my decisions even when you don't agree with them. Support my independence instead of undermining it. Treat me like the competent adult I still am. She wiped her eyes with a napkin and looked around the kitchen where she'd grown up. Are you really going to change your will? That depends on whether you give me reasons to change it back. What would those reasons look like? I thought about Margaret and what she would have wanted for our daughter. Treating me with respect. Supporting my choices about my own life. Visiting because you want to see me, not because you're worried about me. Building a relationship with your father instead of managing a problem. And if I do those things, then maybe I'll remember that I raised a daughter I can trust with my legacy. She gathered her purse and keys, moving slowly like someone who'd just received life-changing news. Dad, I need some time to think about everything you've said. Take all the time you need, sweetheart. But remember, I'm 75, not 95. I don't have unlimited time to wait for you to decide whether you respect me enough to deserve my trust. After she left, I called Richard Harrison to schedule our appointment for Monday morning. It was time to protect my independence legally and financially, regardless of whether Jennifer chose to repair our relationship emotionally. That evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset paint my garden in golden light. Margaret's rose bushes were blooming, the tomatoes were getting ripe, and Mrs. Patterson was hanging laundry on her line next door. This was the life I'd built, the home I'd earned, the independence I'd maintained. Jennifer could choose to be part of it on terms that respected my autonomy, or she could continue fighting a battle that would ultimately cost her everything she thought she was trying to protect. Either way, I was going to live my remaining years on my own terms, in my own house, making my own decisions. And if my daughter couldn't accept that, she'd learn the hard way that love and respect couldn't be purchased with an inheritance that might not exist anymore. 3 months later, I was transplanting seedlings in my garden when Tommy came running across the yard, his backpack bouncing as he headed straight for my tomato plants. Grandpa, Mom said I could help you plant the fall vegetables today. I looked up to see Jennifer walking slowly behind him, carrying a pitcher of lemonade and wearing an expression I hadn't seen in years. Genuine happiness without any underlying agenda. Is that right? I asked, wiping dirt from my hands. And what does your mom know about fall gardening? I've been reading about it, Jennifer said, setting the pitcher on my patio table. Did you know you can grow lettuce and spinach all through the winter if you protect them properly? It was a small thing, but it meant everything. For the first time in years, Jennifer was showing interest in something I cared about instead of trying to change something about my life. I've been growing winter vegetables for 30 years, I said with a smile. Your mother and I used to have fresh salad greens through January. I remember, Jennifer said softly. I remember helping Mom pick lettuce for Christmas dinner when I was Tommy's age. Over the past 3 months, our relationship had slowly rebuilt itself on a foundation of mutual respect instead of financial dependence. Jennifer had stopped calling with manufactured concerns about my welfare. She'd stopped discussing my competency with Mark where Tommy could hear. Most importantly, she'd started visiting for the simple pleasure of spending time together. The changes hadn't been immediate or easy. Our first few conversations after the inheritance discussion had been awkward and careful, both of us testing new boundaries. But gradually, we'd rediscovered the relationship we'd had before money and control had complicated everything. Dad, Jennifer said as Tommy ran off to investigate the butterfly bushes, I owe you an apology I should have made months ago. You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. Yes, I do. I owe you an apology for treating you like a problem to be managed instead of a person to be respected. I owe you an apology for making decisions about your life without considering what you actually wanted. She sat down in one of my patio chairs, looking out at the garden that had become the symbol of everything she tried to take away from me. Mark and I have been seeing a financial planner about our retirement. We realized we'd been counting on your house as part of our security, which wasn't fair to you or realistic for us. That's good to hear. We've also been talking to Tommy about what it means to respect older people, and how being worried about someone doesn't give you the right to control their choices. I looked at my grandson, who was now showing Mrs. Patterson the butterfly he'd caught and carefully released. How's he handling all this? Better than we were, honestly. He never understood why we thought you needed supervision. To him, you're just grandpa, the same person you've always been. Kids see clearly sometimes when adults make things complicated. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, watching her son explore the garden with the freedom I'd fought to maintain for myself. Dad, I need you to know that I'm not going to ask you to change your will back. Why not? Because I need to earn your trust again before I deserve it. And because I want you to know that I love you for who you are, not for what you might leave me. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Sweetheart, I changed it back 2 weeks ago. She looked shocked. Why? Because you proved you could respect my independence without being forced to. Because you chose our relationship over your financial security. Because you remembered how to be my daughter instead of my manager. Tears gathered in her eyes, but they were different from the tears she'd cried months earlier. These were tears of relief and gratitude instead of fear and manipulation. Thank you, Dad. No, Jennifer. Thank you for giving me back my daughter. As the sun set over my garden that evening, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned about independence, respect, and the difference between love and control. I was still 75, still living alone in my big house, still making my own decisions about my own life. But now I was doing it with the support of a daughter who had learned to respect my choices instead of fighting them. And that made all the difference in the world. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone you love is the freedom to live their own life. Even when that freedom feels scary, even when their choices aren't what you would choose, and even when letting go means trusting them to know what's best for themselves. I taught my daughter that lesson the hard way, but she'd learned it completely. And now we could move forward together, with love and respect instead of fear and control guiding our relationship. The nursing home brochures went in the trash where they belonged, and I went back to the business of living my life on my own terms, surrounded by people who loved me enough to let me do exactly that. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up for your independence against well-meaning family members? Let us know your story.